They prepared the feast for weeks, roasting lamb, uncorking wine, dressing in their best. They danced, they sang, they fed their children, and then, as dawn approached, they locked their doors, doused their homes in oil, and burned themselves alive. All of them. No survivors. But why? Part 1. The forgotten town that ate itself. The town was called Lutenberg once. Nestled between the Carpathian foothills and the river, it was a place few remembered, and even fewer could find. No roads led there anymore, only stories. The kind passed in whispers, between border guards and night, always beginning the same way. They all burned, willingly. In the summer of 1821, a Prussian surveyor named Otto Richter stumbled upon a field of charred foundations while mapping border zones. No structures remained, only the faint outlines of homes, a stone well gone dry, and a scorched iron gate hanging open like a mouth Yet, beneath the blackened earth, he found something far more chilling. 278 sets of human remains, all buried in fetal positions, arms folded as if asleep, and all dated to the same week. Each skull bore a single line etched across the top, neither fraction or crack, but a mark. Cut. Ritualistic. Intentional. Richter sent his findings to Berlin. They were ignored. But someone did respond. A single letter arrived at his, and weeks later, unsigned, written in thick red ink. They didn't die in fear. They died in worship. Until 1903, when a tattered diary surfaced in a church basement. It was found behind a false wall, wrapped in oilcloth, tied with dried rosemary, and bound in lambskin. The fire was not the end. It was the lock. Decades passed. Lutenberg became legend, a forgotten ruin swallowed by moss and pine. Its pages were damped, scorched at the edges. Its first line simply read, "This is the account of Father Emil Novak, the last outsider to eat with the people of Lutenberg." They offered him hot bread, warm stew, a bed near the fire. What followed were 89 pages of careful, trembling script, half prayer, half confession. A record of a village preparing for its last celebration. And the voice behind the ink, haunted, terrified, but faithful. He had arrived on a Thursday midwinter. The river was frozen. Smoke rose from narrow chimneys. The people were kind, hospitable. He asked why everyone seemed so calm. They told him, "The feast is coming, and we must be good meat." Father Novak laughed there. He wouldn't laugh again. Part 2. The silence beneath the snow. The second day in Lutenberg was colder than the first. Father Novak awoke to the stillness of frost blanketing the window. Outside, children played in the square. But something was strange. They did not speak. No laughter, no shouting. They moved in silence, mimicking one another in an eerie, synchronized dance, hands twitching, feet gliding softly through snow as if pulled by invisible strings. When Novak asked about it, the innkeeper merely smiled. He was not just a priest, he was a man of record, sent from to observe the seasonal rituals of outlying communities. He expected primitive rites, perhaps relics of paganism. Each doll's face was stitched shut, its dress stained with oak. Symbols were carved into the wood. A spiral, a flame, and what looked like a rib. "They're rehearsing," she said, wiping flour from her apron. "The children must know the final gesture, so their mouths do not betray them." That evening, Novak wandered the edge of town, notebook in hand. What he found instead were signs of something older, deeper. He passed a home where 7 dolls had been buried upright in the snow, faces turned toward the church. He passed the town well sealed shut by a heavy wooden lid, nailed dozens of times around the rim. A boy approached him then, no older than 6. He held out a small bundle wrapped in black cloth. Inside was a tooth, human, fresh. "It belonged to my brother," the boy whispered. "He was the last to lie. He's quiet now." Before Novak could respond, the boy vanished into the trees, like snow into fog. Back at the inn, he pressed the innkeeper for answers. Her hands trembled as she poured tea. "We have followed the old hunger," she said. "Before your god walked, there was fire. And before fire, there was the one that eats names." Novak asked if it was a demon. She shook her head. "No worse, it remembers, and what is remembered cannot stay dead." She leaned in then, voice dropping to a breath, uncovering rows of tongues preserved in glass jars, stacked like relics. "Every feast, it demands silence. Words nourish it. Lies amuse it. But truth burns that night." Novak dreamed of teeth falling from the sky like snow. He stood in the square again, but this time the children weren't dancing, they were kneeling, digging into the ground with their bare hands. And in the center of the square stood a tall figure robed in tattered silk, its face obscured, holding a massive golden spoon. It looked at him. "You are not meat," it said. "You are flavor." Novak woke screaming. No one came, but on his door, a symbol had been drawn in blood, a spiral, crossed by a single bone. Part 3. The rehearsal that no one survives twice. It was on the third night that Father Novak was invited to rehearsal. The invitation was not spoken. It was left beneath his bowl of barley stew, an old scrap of parchment with a single phrase written in waxy ink. Eat in rhythm, drink in silence, repeat what you forget. That evening, as dusk bled into black, he was led blindfolded into a hall that didn't exist during the day. It stood behind the granary, half buried in snow, roof sagging as if too many memories pressed from within. Inside, 40 villagers were seated in perfect lines, men, women, even elders whose bodies trembled but still held posture. At the head table stood the mayor, flanked by 3 silent girls wearing antlers carved from bone. A long table stretched before them, but no food had yet been served. Only knives. Each place setting had a blade resting where a fork should be. "This is not a meal," the mayor announced softly. "This is remembering." Left, right, left, pause, right, then silence. The room echoed with breath alone. No one spoke, not even Novak. Then it began. A rhythm, palms slapping wooden tables in unison. A man stepped forward. Middle-aged, he wept openly. "I told her I did not bury the dog," he whispered, "but I did. I did it alive." A bell rang. The 3 girls stepped forward and gently placed a linen cloth over the man's head. Then they took him out a back door. No scream followed, only a sound like water boiling. No one moved. Novak took a bite. "Lies ferment," the mayor said, "and fermentation feeds." Then came the food. Bowls of boiled roots, spiced wine, bread made with ash. It was bitter, wrong. He looked inside his bowl. Beneath the broth floated a strip of paper, wet, barely legible. It read, "Your silence is a lie." Novak wanted to leave, but the door behind him had disappeared, and so had his name. One of the girls approached, placed a hand on his forehead, and drew a spiral with wine. "You have spoken too much," she said gently. "You will sit in the middle tomorrow." Later that night, he returned to the church, hand trembling as he wrote in his journal. They rehearse because the real feast is not for them. They eat only to be eaten. They confess only to rot clean. They call it remembrance. I call it He placed the journal under his mattress, just in case. But when he woke the next morning, the pages were gone, and in their place was a knife, still warm. There at first light, Father Novak marched toward the town hall. He hadn't slept. The knife beneath his pillow weighed heavier than guilt, heavier than any sacrament he'd ever carried. He wanted answers, names, reason. He wanted to look the mayor in the eye and demand to know what flavor he was being prepared to become. Candles lay melted on the floor, some still attached to bones in place of holders. But when he arrived, the town hall stood empty. Dust clung to every surface. The windows were boarded from within. A woman sweeping outside the bakery caught his gaze. "I need to speak with your mayor," he said. Graybeard, long coat. He spoke at the feast rehearsal. She blinked. "We have no mayor. Father met him last night." The woman froze, her broom slowly coming to a halt. "You must be mistaken. Mayor Dorov died 73 years ago. We don't speak his name. We burned his portrait. We burned all of him." Novak felt the blood drain from his face. Candles were rearranged into spirals. A black feather lay on his altar, wet with something that wasn't wax. They buried mirrors, dozens of them, handheld, polished, some cracked, but I saw him. The woman turned back to sweeping. Psalms replaced with recipes. Genesis overwritten with chants, and in Revelation, a single handwritten line in the margin. "Then he saw you too." That's worse. At the church, Novak found a vestry had been disturbed. The bells in the tower had been the ropes coiled like intestines at the foot of the stairs. A ripple, a presence so ancient it felt cold even to his bones. He tried to pray, but no words came. When he opened the Bible, the pages had changed. "No fire is eternal unless it eats what we love." That night, he wandered. He watched as the villagers gathered in silence, digging small pits along the tree line. One child dropped hers, and when the glass shattered, she screamed. Not in pain but in recognition. She looked up at Novak and sobbed. "Now it knows I'm here." "What knows?" he whispered. The girl shook her head and pointed toward the dark ridge beyond the trees, the spine behind the sky. Novak felt something move out there, in the black forest. A song hummed in the wind then, faint, wordless, but it twisted his stomach. He turned to run, but an old man blocked his path. Not the mayor, someone else. He held a bowl of soup and smiled. "Eat fast. The closer we get to the feast, the more you must remember what you forgot." Novak backed away. "What did I forget?" The man grinned wider. "You were here once before. You broke the silence, and that's why the fire waits for you, too." The cellar of the unreturned priests. The cellar beneath the chapel hadn't been touched in decades, or so Novak thought. He found the entrance behind the altar, hidden behind a rotten tapestry of St. Bartholomew. Beneath it, a trap door sealed with rusted nails and an iron chain. It took him an hour to break it open, but when he pried the wood loose, a breath of warm, sour air rose from below. It smelled of wax, and ink, and old blood. He descended with only a candle, his breath loud against the narrow stone. Beneath the church lay a room not wide, but long. The walls were lined with shelves, and on them sat dozens of journals, each bound in cracked leather, each tagged with a name carved into bone. He pulled the nearest, Father Petrovich -1761. Inside were pages of frantic scripturatic handwriting, margins filled with drawings, spirals, bones, eyes with too many pupils. The people of Lutenberg do not confess to God, Petrovich had written. They confess to the fire beneath the names. I have seen it flicker in their soup. I have heard it gurgle from behind the well. Another journal, Father Albrecht, 1804. They wept not for me, but for what I would become in the fire. They offered me a seat at the final feast. I refused. They say the flames twist different if the soul resists. I am not meat. I am seasoning. Novak's hands shook. He opened one last journal, older than the others. The ink had faded, but one phrase was etched so deeply it pierced through the page. We don't leave. We become the flame. He turned to leave, but behind him, footsteps not loud, barefoot, he raised his candle, small eyes too dark, too calm. The cover was darker than the others, and when he looked, his name was carved on the spine. A girl stood at the end of the cellar. She pointed to one of the books he hadn't touched. That one has your name. He stepped closer. Father Emil Novak, -1903. But he hadn't written it. Inside, the pages were blank, except a final one. It read, "You will write until the flame eats you. You will write what it needs, or it will write you instead." Novak closed the book. His hands now smelled like ash. He turned to speak to the girl, but she was gone. Only a doll lay where she stood, stitched eyes, and no mouth. That night, Novak did not sleep. The spiral had returned to his door, and now, beneath it, a new symbol had been added. A spoon, dipped in fire, and beside it a note. 2 nights left. You will taste what remembers. Part 6. The town that erased its exits at dawn. Novak packed. He wrapped his crucifix in cloth, stuffed a lambskin journal into his coat, and took only what he could carry. The taste of last night's stew still clung to the back of his throat, oily sweet and wrong. His boots crunched through snow, his breath white and desperate. The woods stood like sentinels, bare branches like ribs. He needed distance, he needed roads, he needed sky that didn't hum at night. He left through the back path, past the butcher's shed and the half-frozen garden. The first sign came after an hour. A trail marker he recognized. Twisted, instead of pointing toward the road to the arrow, was bent in a full circle pointing back at him. He walked faster. Then, the second sign, he passed the same well. Not one like it. The same well, stone cracked in the same place. Rope snapped halfway down. But that was impossible. He had walked south, not east. A third sign. A crow headless nailed to a tree, its wings outstretched. He had seen it yesterday. He passed the same stone 3 times. His heart thundered, but the woods grew quieter, like they were muffling his breath, absorbing his fear. The horizon never changed, just trees and sky and that deep humming, cold exactly as it was now. Only this time, its claws pointed toward him. He ran. Branches whipped his face. Finally, he broke through the tree line and found himself in the square. The village, the same children, stood there, motionless, facing him. Candles set in skulls. A banner above read. And at the center, a long table was being assembled. Chairs lined its length. For the Last Supper, for the remembered flame. The innkeeper approached. Her smile was kind, but her eyes were resigned. You tried to leave, Father. He nodded, speechless. Everyone tries. The first time, he whispered. What is this place? She touched his face gently. It is the mouth between memory and forgetting. A town that chose to feed what the world cast out. We are the marrow of history. You're all mad, he hissed. It listens better that way. The innkeeper didn't deny it. Every candle seemed to flicker in rhythm with his heartbeat. Maybe, but madness has order. You'll understand on the final night. You'll taste the truth. She handed him a bowl. For strength, she said. He looked inside. It was empty. You must imagine the flavor first. She smiled. That night, Novak sat alone in the chapel. The walls creaked like old bones. The journal now wrote itself. He hadn't touched the pen, but ink appeared on the pages. He ran, it read, he came back. He will be carved into the fire. He will remember what we forgot. Novak tore the page, the ink bled onto his hands, and it did not stop. The rehearsal began before sundown. Novak was led to the long table at the center of the square. Snow had been cleared, revealing dirt packed in careful spirals beneath each chair. 40 villagers sat in silence, eyes closed, hands resting on the table like they were waiting for a sermon or a sacrifice. The children stood behind them, each holding a plate. The mayor, or the man who called himself so, appeared again. The children stepped forward and placed the plates. A third held a lump of bread, steaming and shaped like a clenched fist. His robe was darker this time, his beard longer, his smile wider tonight. He said, "We sample memory." He clapped once. Each one carried something different. One had a slice of tongue preserved in wine, another a glass jar of black salt. When the plates reached Novak, he saw his own dish. At first it looked like boiled root, but then it twitched. A small shape, cold and soft, the size of a mouse heart, moved slightly on the plate, as if remembering it once beat. A child whispered beside him, "It's your first lie." Cooked in regret, Novak pushed the plate away. The mayor raised a brow. "He refuses." He asked the crowd, "Shall we show him how truth tastes?" The villagers turned to him, eyes wide, mouths stitched. Literally, their lips had been sewn shut with fine red thread. Not all of them, just the front row. A woman at the far end stood. She held a bowl in her hands, steaming with broth so dark it shimmered like oil. She stepped toward Novak and said through the thread, "Taste or it tastes you." She tipped the bowl to his lips. Hundreds, screaming, weeping, singing lullabies in languages he had never heard. Reflex took over, and then his mouth filled with sound, not flavor. Voices. One voice stood out. "Father Novak, why did you leave me in the snow?" He dropped the bowl. His hands shook. It was his brother's voice. From childhood. But Emil Novak never had a brother, at least not one, he remembered. The mayor approached. Each dish is a memory burned, a truth forgotten. We flavored the fire with our sins. He leaned close. "And soon, Father, you will season the feast, with everything you tried to bury." Later in the chapel, Novak vomited into the font. He stared at his reflection in the holy water, his eyes darker than before, his teeth slightly gray. The journal still wrote itself. Tonight's page simply read, "He remembered the wrong name." ChatGPT said, DIY La Fonetca Kuchbane, the last feast before an entire town set itself on fire. Part 8, the contract beneath the altar. The snow fell heavier now. It didn't melt, even indoors. Novak noticed that as he stepped into the chapel, flakes clung to his robe, to the altar, to the pages of the holy book, even though no wind blew and the doors were sealed shut. He moved toward the altar with purpose. Something beneath it called to him, not in words but in weight, as if the stones themselves hummed with memory. Using a rustic crowbar, he pried the altar from its base. Beneath he found what he didn't know he'd been looking for. A sealed cavity lined with wax and teeth. Hundreds pressed into the seal like a protective war door. An offering. At the center, wrapped in red linen, was a scroll. Its parchment was older than the church, older than the town. The ink shimmered slightly, as if it was alive, or very recently fed. He unwrapped it slowly. It was not a religious decree, it was a contract, signed in blood, countersigned in something darker. At the top, "To whom this may drown." Below it, in flowing script, "We, the remaining, the silent, the meat that remembers, offer our breath, our future dead, and the flavor of our guilt to the one beneath the flame. Feed it our birthdays, salted with names." Even a name. Novak recognized Albrecht, the priest whose journal he had read. "Let nobody burn clean, and in return, we ask not for life, but to forget the scream before the fire." The signatures that followed were endless. Villagers passed, priests, midwives, hunters. His own hand trembled as he reached the bottom of the scroll. The final name was already written, Emil Novak, but not in his handwriting. Beside it the ink was still wet. He hadn't signed. The long table had grown longer. Chairs now lined both sides, stretching to the end of the street. And at the far end there was a throne. But the contract knew he would. A bell tolled outside low hollow like it came from underground. He arose, carrying the scroll to the window. In the square, the final preparations were underway. Black, carved from bone and coal. Above it hung a banner, "He who eats the guilt of the dead has awakened." Villagers moved like shadows, carrying dishes under linen cloth. Every step synchronized, every footfall a heartbeat. Then Novak saw the girl again, the one from the cellar. She stood at the chapel door, barefoot in snow, holding something in her arms. A book, his journal. She placed it on the chapel steps, and whispered, "You forgot him again." "Forgot who?" he asked. "The brother you buried alive, in the well, when you were 7. He collapsed. The memories slammed into him like fire. The cold, the splash, the silence afterward, the lie he told. The snow beneath him melted as his body remembered what his mind refused. When he looked again, the girl was gone. But the journal had opened, and the next page wrote itself. Tomorrow is the feast. Tomorrow, the fire finally eats. Part 9. The throne of smoke and salt. The final morning arrived with no sun. The clouds hung low, not gray but the color of ash. No birds sang, no footsteps echoed. The entire town moved in silence, like marionettes pulled by strings dipped in ink and blood. Novak awoke in the chapel, but he was not alone. They spoke no words, only gestured. He was to rise, to dress, to be adorned. It was heavy, hand-stitched, and every inch of it was embroidered with words, not Latin, but names, confessions, cries. 3 villagers stood above him, cloaked in robes, the color of candle soot. They led him to a dressing room beneath the vestry, where a single robe hung on a hook carved from bone. The lining was colder than fabric should be. He put it on. Each chair had a symbol burned into the back spirals. Knives, spoons, flames. Novak was led to the throne itself, the seat of honor. At the square, the table had become something else. It stretched now in a full circle, encircling the throne. The villagers stood in a wide ring, hands held, eyes closed. The mayor approached, once more robe flaming red, face painted with ash. "Father Emil Novak," he said solemnly, "you have remembered, you have tasted, you now preside." He placed a silver ladle in Novak's hand. "The fire beneath us was once a god. Now it is only hunger. But hunger remembers who fed it." Then the food was brought out, not in trays, in coffins. 6 of them. One contained a stew labeled First Betrayal, another a roast marked Mother's Mercy. One dish pulsed faintly, as if still alive. Each opened slowly, revealing not corpses, but dishes carved from flesh and story. Not metaphor. Actual flame, swirling like it was dreaming. Every bite a truth, every swallow a binding. The girl from the cellar returned. She walked solemnly to Novak, holding a goblet. Inside, "Fire, drink," she said. "So you remember what forgetting costs." Novak hesitated, then drank. His throat burned, his vision blurred, and suddenly he saw them all. The priests before him, the children buried beneath the well, the townspeople, generations deep, lining the spiral down beneath the chapel floor. They were the feast. They had always been. The mayor raised his hand. The townspeople began to sing, not with voices but with breath, a low humming. Each note twisted the smoke rising from the table, forming shapes in the air, wolves' eyes, mouths opening to scream but never closing. And then the mayor said, "The fire is ready? Let him eat. Let us burn." Part 10. The town that burned itself to be forgotten. They didn't scream when the fire came. They sang. Novak sat frozen on the throne of smoke, the silver ladle still clenched in his hand, now glowing faintly red from the heat rising beneath the earth. Around him, the villagers had already begun. Some poured oil on their robes. Others kissed the flames, licking at their fingertips like they were lovers returned from war. He stood tall, even as the flesh cracked and blackened, and raised his arms to the heavens. The mayor, smiling like a man fulfilled, stepped onto the table and lit his own feet with the goblet of living fire. "Let this night feed the oldest hunger. Let us become what cannot be named." The chairs, the coffins. He tried to rise, but the throne had fused with him. His skin stuck to its arms. His fingers bled where the ladle burned through. The flame swallowed the cloth, and still no one screamed. Only Novak remained untouched. The robe he wore grew heavier. Its embroidered names now glowed, pulsed, twisted like worms beneath the fabric. From the smoke the little girl emerged again. Only now, she wasn't a girl. Her eyes glowed faintly red. Her hair danced upward as if under water. Her mouth no longer smiled. "You remembered too much," she whispered. "What are you?" he gasped. Still silent, she leaned close. "We are what remains when the world forgets. We are the taste beneath the tongue. We are every confession that died in fire." She pointed to the chapel. Its roof was aflame, but the bells still hung. "You can stay," she said. "Forget, burn and become part of the memory that eats itself," or he asked. "The dead, the ones beneath the well, the ones buried in the stew." They begged him. She looked up, into the dark sky. "Or walk away. Carry this truth, and be hunted by every god who needs silence." The fire touched his foot. They asked him his name. "It did not," Burnett whispered. 1,000 voices stay through ash, through screams that finally came not from others, but from himself. Not from pain, but from remembering. He stood, the throne cracked, his robe split. And for the first time in days, he ran through flame. He does not recall how he escaped, only that he woke in the snow. A week later, a search party found him wandering the edge of a road that no longer connected to any town. He said nothing. His tongue had been burned smooth. His fingers still gripped a journal that no one could open, and in his coat pocket a ladle, silver, cold, unmarked, except on the inside etched in faint script. "The last feast always has one survivor." To this day, no map shows a village named Lutenburg. No archives lists Father Emil Novak. No record of a town-wide immolation ever made it into church records. But every so often, in a forest in southern Poland, campers say they hear a hum from beneath the earth, a warmth in the snow, and the smell of stew that no fire should ever cook. And now you know about the town that chose fire over forgetting, about the last feast, and the one who walked away with the taste of ash in his mouth. But stories like this, they don't end. They linger. They pass from tongue to tongue, in places no map dares name. If this tale stayed with you, if something deep down still feels warm when it shouldn't, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel for more histories that were never meant to be remembered. And in the comments, tell us, would you have stayed? Until next time, keep your matches dry. And don't trust a feast where no one eats.